war, according to him, aid to the Zelensky regime will not stop. So what he means is that the war will continue until there will be no more citizens of Ukraine. The EU has already allocated 16 billion euros for military purposes to Ukraine. It has trained more than 17,000 Ukrainian soldiers. On the 30th of May, the head of European diplomacy not only welcomed deliveries of long-range weapons to Ukraine, but also called for their increase. I like to remind that we are talking about what is supposed to be diplomacy, because Joseph Borrell is the head of the diplomatic service of the European Union. But in reality, there is no diplomacy. There is just an aggressive, Russophobic implementation of their long-term goals of, as I said before, deterrence, and now of inflicting strategic defeat on Russia. The West's role in the conflict is becoming increasingly clear, even for themselves. Ukraine is only a tool for the West, and the Ukrainians are pawns that West is prepared to sacrifice endlessly in the confrontation with Russia. Everything is put at the stake by West because of their unhealthy to make independent decision in internal or foreign policy. In order to prove that, and also to prove that they are still capable of something, and the previous era of imperialism and colonialism haven't stayed in the past, they do all this, take all these actions. However, a practical result of the implementation of this policy, according to them, should be the infliction of a strategic defeat on Russia. They also add China and others who are not ready to submit to their will. The EU has demonstrated that the Ukrainian crisis is a good way to increase the budget. Not talking about national budgets, but some other ones. I will talk about it in detail a bit later, as we have found
Наций через секретариат, то хотелось бы от секретариата получить соответствующие данные. Ведь сам секретариат на ситуацию в Буче ссылался неоднократно. Все эти действия украинских властей и их западных покровителей свидетельствуют о безусловной необходимости выполнения поставленных задач, о чем неоднократно говорило руководство нашей страны. Соседняя страна. 14 мая состоялся второй тур выборов главы Молдавского автономного региона Гагаузия. Победу одержал кандидат от партии ШОР Евгения Гуцул. Соответствующее решение ЦИК Гагаузии вечером 16 мая единогласно одобрило региональное народное собрание.
There has been the second tour
торгово-экономической и других областях. Мы надеемся, что вновь избранное руководство автономии продолжит.
The candidate of Shor Party, Evgenia Gusu, has won, and this decision has been unanimously approved by the national Russian side. Respects the result of the will of the autonomous residents. Russia and Gagauzia cooperate closely in cultural, humanitarian, trade, economic, and other areas. We hope that the newly elected leadership of the autonomy will continue to consolidate the cooperation willingness to further develop the ties with the traditional Russian-friendly Gagauzia. Unfortunately, as in the first round of voting, which took place on the 30th of April, Russian representatives were not allowed to monitor the elections. However, members of diplomatic missions from a number of other countries, first of all from the countries of the collective West, were allowed to do so. We can also see that the rejection by the residents of Gagauzia of the Russophobic and neoliberal agenda alien to them caused disguised disappointment in the official Chisinau. There are calls to annul the results of the elections, to de-Russify and Romanize the autonomy. The head of Moldova has perhaps cancelled the very word Moldova because Maria Sandu has made unbelievable claims according to which the results of the elections of Gagauzia are such because everyone speaks Russian there. But what language are they supposed to use? Are they supposed to use the Romanian language? Language that has come to replace the Moldovan language just because the leader of the country has a Romanian passport and implements the interests of another country in a foreign state. We would like to say that according to mass media, there are detentions and searches conducted by law enforcement agencies in Gagauzia. We believe that the Moldovan authorities are to respect the choice of the residents of the autonomy who said an unequivocal note understanding of realities in the context of the future.
The situation at the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, I would like to say a few words. Unfortunately, recently, from the 11th to 12th of May, there have been some violations, ceasefire violations from both sides in the area of Sotk village of the Kirkunik region. Now the situation has stabilized. We call on the parties to refrain from provocative action and escalation of the situation.
7 мая в южной части Шанской национальной области Республики Союз Мьянма были обстреляны транспортные средства с сотрудниками аккредитованных в этой стране дипломатических миссий Индонезии и Сингапура. Они участвовали в доставке гуманитарной помощи, которая оказывается по каналам Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии. В результате нападения поврежден один из автомобилей сопровождения. К счастью, никто из местных или иностранных участников гуманитарного конвоя не пострадал. Официальные власти Республики Союза Мьянма возлагают ответственность за данный террористический акт на отряды, как они называются, непримиримая оппозиция, формирование вооруженных этнических группировок. Реагируя на выраженную ОСЯН озабоченность в связи с инцидентом, руководство Мьянмы подтверждает твердый настрой на укрепление взаимодействия с ассоциацией, в том числе по гуманитарной линии в соответствии согласованным в апреле 2021 года консенсусом из 5 пунктов, называется так документ. Указанное нападение является очевидным примером подрывной деятельности радикального крыла мьянмарских антиправительственных сил, целенаправленно торпедирующих усилия по распределению гуманитарной помощи, обеспечению стабильности, социально-экономического развития в приграничных районах Мьянмы. Продолжающиеся акты насилия в отношении представителей власти и гражданских лиц, а теперь уже и дипломатических представителей, являются следствием финансовой и материальной подпитки мьянмарских оппозиционных
in the regions of Myanmar near the borders. The acts of violence that continue are a consequence of financial support to Myanmar opposition forces, primarily to the self-proclaimed government of national unity, so-called government of national unity by the United States and some other states. What can be said about these subversive efforts by Washington? They contradict the process of strengthening peace in Myanmar and can be a threat to security of the bordering states and the Eastern Asia in general. This incident has demonstrated the danger of such support to destructive forces and armed groups. We continue to support ASEAN in a political settlement of the situation in Myanmar, and we are convinced that the collective efforts of the ASEAN in Myanmar. There are many questions regarding the arrest of the assets of the Finnish consulate in St. Petersburg.
Наставили перед финской стороной вопрос об отмене введенных рестрикций. Мы также предупреждали, делали это тоже неоднократно.
Some details. This is a response to the actions of Finland, and they can take into account only one Finnish bank. The issue of cancelling the restrictions has been raised many times, but we will have to provide a response. We have mentioned that many times, but the Finnish authorities have taken no steps in that direction, and their actions were contrary to the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961. We will continue our action based on reciprocality. And it is surprising that when Finland started to comment on that situation, they forgot about their own actions with regard to Russian diplomatic missions. They have a very short memory. And one more point regarding the norms, the international norms being forgotten that regulate the activities of diplomats in many contexts of their profession. The collective West that aims at confrontation continues to undermine the interaction and ignore the norms of diplomatic cooperation by using many different used to issue visas to some Russian representatives traveling to the 216th session of the Executive Board of UNESCO. Such incidents, but these are not incidents, these are violations of the obligations taken with a clear political pretext. And in that manner, They disrupted the work of the Russian delegation in the 33rd session of the UNESCO International Programme for the Development of Communication in November 2022. Paris is intentionally breaking its obligations of the host party. And please attention, such bodies are destined to provide a platform for interstate dialogue on protecting media and ensuring the pluralism of opinion. So how will you ensure the pluralism of opinion? Just by not admitting those who have some other opinion, and there will be only those who have some right opinion, and then you will tell that you have pluralism, that you have only one opinion. Is that how pluralism is now viewed in Paris? It's really shameful. We call on the French side to stop abusing the honor bestowed on it in the future. It is not only a message for the UNESCO Secretariat, but also a message for the organization, the United Nations organization in New York. This message is passed by us to the UN Secretariat for the understanding how the collective Western regimes, not acting in accordance with the interest of their peoples, how they are contrary to their own legal international obligations. So, several words about the report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights on Mali. We have drawn attention that the report is about the crimes in the vicinity of the village of Mura. And the office of the High Commissioner, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, spread some false data on that, and there are references for anonymous sources and some sources that can allegedly be trusted. And the aim of that is to convince the international community, as they call it, are guilty in killings of local populations. Such insinuations are passed by
на проверенной, достоверной информации, которая
sources, the sources that are not called, some unknown interlocutors. This is not applicable here because it is about the document, not about some private opinion of some expert, but the document that should be based on reliable information that is can be rechecked repeatedly in the United
однобокий и неконструктивный подход управления рискует подорвать репутацию ООН по правам человека. Мы настоятельно призываем экспертов ООН осуществлять свой мандат в деполитизированном ключе, строго придерживаться принципов универсальности, беспристрастности, объективности и неизбирательности, а также взаимоуважительного диалога и сотрудничества. Ну вот еще к издевательству над международным правом, оно, как вы понимаете, имеет разные...
of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we call on this office to pursue its mandate in accordance with impartiality, mutual respectful dialogue and cooperation. One more fact of violation of international rights with regard to sports. The discrimination of Russian athletes is still underway. Following the did not allow the participation of Russian athletes. It was an unscrupulous attempt to
Требование как очередное проявление диктуемого прозападной конъюнктуры антироссийского курса. Сегрегация. Это и есть она. Она принимает в том числе и такие формы. Нет никакого разумного объяснения, что атлеты, спортсмены, которые всю свою жизнь посвятили тренировкам, участию в соревнованиях, исповедуют общеолимпийские, спортивные заповеди, не допускаются по национальному принципу до соревнований. А это именно так. И всем тем, кто сейчас будет рассказывать о том, что это связано с геополитической ситуацией, ведь все то же самое в отношении, в частности, российских спортсменов мы наблюдали на протяжении многих лет. Предлоги были разные, ситуации отличались, а принцип сегрегации в отношении наших спортсменов всегда оставался одним и тем же. Искусственное навязывание нашим спортсменам исключительно по признаку гражданской принадлежности чрезмерных, необоснованных и порой просто унизительных требований нарушает не только Олимпийскую хартию, фундаментальные принципы олимпизма.
The situations were different, but the principle of segregation with regard to the Russian athletes was always the same. Imposing of some humiliating demands to our athletes is not a constitution of the International Weightlifting Federation that prohibits any discrimination, also on political or national grounds. Moreover, searching for some balance, the International Weightlifting Federation also came to the idea of creating a special control and monitoring body that should check, control, and make some decisions with regard to our athletes, and impose punishments, payments for any violations, and the payments that are quite significant. Have they bought some instruments to measure the skulls? Maybe they have some other technological instruments for the form of ears, the form of nose. There are express tests for genetic expertise on a national ground. Maybe there is some questionnaire on which political stance the athletes have. I would like to reply to those who are in charge of such experiments within the International Weightlifting Federation or some other international structure, or just intend to conduct such experiments. Such experiments were already conducted, and the athletes, those who work in the spheres of culture, education, and science, underwent some tests, and they were offered to use some places that will not allow their contacts with people of other nationalities. And many humanitarian, sports, and educational institutions are shameful in that. Some yellow sign on people. Then gas cameras followed, and bloody global slaughter that has been unprecedented, and I hope that they will not repeat. But now we have the repetition of that actions, because people and nationalities are refused decent living, because they need to to live underground because someone decided that they cannot live on the ground, that they are not worthy of that. The whole peoples, ethnical groups and nationalities, they are offered to practice sports, to create art, to study history in some other places, not with other representatives of the international community, of the global and continental community. Those who preach that should know it's just fascism, Nazism. It's neo-Nazism. It's modern. Somewhere it has been changed. Somewhere it has been years ago. This international structure, the International Weightlifting Federation, proposed totalitarian surveillance with some punitive measures. Just think about that. And it's the words of those who are for freedom, democracy, as they call it, tolerance. And what else? Human rights, of course. And it's sad that such inapplicable ideas and demands are, thanks to the decision of the International Olympic Committee, that passed the responsibility for not allowing our athletes to participate in international cooperations. But is it about the sports? Are they connected with the political situation? So you can ski, but weightlifting is impossible. Is that the fact? For example, you can throw the ball over a net. It's normal with regard to the political diversity. But to play basketball, it's inadmissible. It's not absurdity. It's just some wild things. Why for thousands of years of our education, of preserving the culture? Why? What was the aim of that? Or why were the messages to space, to outer space? In some countries they think different than now. I do not know when aliens come. I do not know how they identify who to deal with. They have read the message. It's really frightening. It has been ridiculous before when the fashion, it will change, but it will not change. It's among the illnesses that do not pass themselves.
Так уж рапортовать со штрафами, слежкой, недопуском и так далее, и так далее. Налицо, конечно, кризис современной системы управления мировым спортом. Международные спортивные чиновники вместо...
They are so afraid to be out of favor with their North American handlers that they try to be in the front of the whole situation, and they get engaged in surveillance, non-admission, and other actions. There is a crisis in the current system of world sport governance. National sports officials, instead of fulfilling the direct function of ensuring equitable multilateral cooperation as envisaged by their statutory objectives, are themselves initiating the opposite, a disruption of their functioning. The prohibition of direct discrimination is an important principle of international law that is to be respected both by public and private bodies. They are not only to respect them, but to implement them, to put them into practice. The whole activity, both on public and state and private levels, is to be based on these norms and regulations and should be built upon them and not to exist in a parallel reality, because there are norms and there is a specific conjuncture. The International Olympic Committee is a non-profit international organization and the leader of the Olympic movement And it should also apply non-discriminatory measures against athletes. But we see in our example the exact opposite. Now, you witness involved. The unlawfulness of sanctions against our athletes is so obvious that it was echoed by the UN Special Rapporteur on cultural rights, Alexandra Xanthaka, who found them contrary to the principle of the Fourth Olympic Charter and in violation of the universal and inalienable right to participate in the cultural life of which sport is a part without discrimination. We hope that common sense will finally prevail in the minds of sports officials. I don't know if it will be common sense or something else. I don't even hope that the common sense will prevail, but at least maybe the self-preservation instinct will become to dominate, because everything that defines a human being as a human being is not instincts, but so instincts are there too, and at least the self-preservation instinct is supposed to affect their decisions. Coming back to the diplomatic rhetoric, that's a policy which is destructive. It's detrimental to the development of world sport, which cannot exist when separate. So that's not about sport. That's about something else, like segregation and health.
Быть приравненными к прекрасному саду, для них 100-метровка будет означать...
means, and I believe that they will even go further and will create special conditions for athletes from several countries. For example, 100 meters will consist of 80 meters for some athletes, from specific countries, but for other athletes who are not from the blooming garden countries will have to run for 120 meters. Our athletes have always strictly adhered to all provisions of the Olympic Charter and are ready and willing to participate in international competitions on equal terms with their fellow competitors from other countries that they have proven on numerous occasions. Also, on the 20th of May in Bulgaria, there was a wave of desecration of monuments and burial places of the Red Soldiers who had liberated the country from fascist plague. The memorial to the Soviet soldier in Burgas was mutilated, and the common graves of our soldiers in Sofia town, in the Lozanist districts of the capital, were desecrated. The incessant sacrilegious shenanigans against the monuments of common history of Russia and Bulgaria caused extreme indignation. Russian embassy in Sofia sent a note of protest to the Bulgarian Foreign Ministry. The Bulgarian authorities were instructed that all such incidents should be investigated. Memorials and cultural monuments. They set forth in the Treaty on Friendly Relations and Cooperation between the Russian Federation, the Republic of Bulgaria of August the 4th, 1992, the agreement between the government of the Russian Federation and the government of the Republic of Bulgaria on cooperation in the field of culture, education, and science as of the 19th of April, 1993. Respecting these, the spirit and the letter of this treatise is a moral obligation of a civilized state where thousands had died in order to fight against Nazism. We've been hearing a lot of statements about moral grounds and ethics. Maybe some of them are ambiguous. And we see also people being deleted from the international agenda. They have to apologize for themselves or to compensate for the moral damage only because they just had said a couple of words, they had looked at someone, or maybe something from the past, from 30 years ago, can be used as an accusation of another person. A gesture, a pose, can also be used against a person. So we're not talking about any ambiguous issues. It's not a question of emotional assessment of someone given to somebody else. It's international obligations as bilateral ones, as well as all the commitments undertaken by Sofia in the context of the spirit and the letter of many international bodies and organizations. If the whole Western world is discussing who cast a look on whom 30 years ago and what consequences should we witness today, shouldn't they care about what is happening right now and what should be qualified as a crime? Why don't they want to investigate this, or at least to condemn these actions? There is even no attempt to talk about that between each other in Bulgaria or on international platforms. So we are the only ones who are talking about it. Why is it so that everything which was sacred for the Bulgarian population and for Europeans in general for decades is now desecrated and it doesn't cause any emotions? What has changed? I can give an answer to that. There is a political agenda. There is an agenda which pursues such actions. It's the encouragement by providing financement and using the political conjuncture. For such actions, relevant structures and foundations are provided with grants, and such offenders are the mainstream. It's a way which is full of easy money gained through horrifying actions. People start to believe that this is a way to success. So that's a political order which was made in NATO-centric structure. Before that, they hadn't done that because veterans had been alive, were alive, people who had lost their comrades in this fight, people who knew the price of the victory. They were still alive back then, and NATO countries were only preparing for conducting such operations. Now, there are less and less remaining veterans, not only combat veterans, but also the victims of concentration camps and the workers on the home front and witnesses of that events in general. There are almost none of them left. That's why such actions are possible now. But we need to use the constant index as a reference point. We need and foremost the Nuremberg Tribunal. That's supposed to be the reference point. When you are guided by this decision, you understand how blasphemous and sacrilegious is the order aimed at rewriting the history and de facto elimination of monuments devoted to heroes. The ignoring of the systematic attempts against the sacred memory of liberators is equal to revanchism and Nazism. The scale of the vandalism could have been even greater had it not been for the efforts of the Bulgarian patriotically minded part of the society. For example, from 7th to 10th of May, Russophile associations in Bulgaria organized around the clock guardian of the monument to the Soviet army in Sofia. So are they guarding a warehouse with pharmaceuticals or food and gangsters and criminals intend to rob the place? Is it why the volunteers have to make efforts? Those are monuments devoted to our heroes, connected to our country and to Bulgaria. And people have to guard around the clock. Just think about it. In order to prevent vandalism against monuments, which was broken in February of this year, as evidenced by the Victory Day commemorative event throughout the country, including numerous processions as part of the Immortal Regiment. Bulgarian patriots remember and cherish the shared history of our countries and are not about to give it up. But we see that, unfortunately, a part of the political elite in the country cherish other sentiments without putting an end to such actions. By the way, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution in 2017 and declares the 16th of May the International Day of Living Together. A special place in the promotion of living together in peace is to mobilize the international community to promote mutual understanding and harmony while preserving diversity and difference. We believe that it's important to preserve the cultural and civilizational diversity of the modern world, and we support the work of the UN structures in this area. We want this to be implemented and cherished in the context that had been envisaged by the world community, the international community, and everything that can work against such a unifying approach is to be condemned, not tacitly, but actively and openly, because it's a guarantee for the unifying and peaceful agenda to development that was proclaimed by the UN in 2002, which celebrates the world's cultural diversity and the role of intercultural dialogue.
Проходил в прошлом году.
The notion of cultural diversity as a factor of development enshrined in the UNESCO Universal Declaration of Cultural Diversity of 2001 is a reflection of the importance of cultural diversity for the development. Universal Declaration of Cultural Diversity laid the foundation for the organization of normative actions, including the final declaration of the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policy and Sustainable Development, Mondiacult 2022, which took place in September last year, during which the UNESCO members of culture from 150 states, including Russia, reaffirmed their commitment to the protection and promotion of cultural diversity as the basis of the identity of people and the basic principle of all the UNESCO conventions and declarations of cultural diversity, and the promotion of the development of cultural industries and the development of a more sustainable global society, considering that culture is recognized as a factor of growth and ensuring its protection and promotion of prosperity should be seen as a way of achieving a number of sustainable development goals. Programs and projects in the field of culture currently being implemented in the Russian Federation are aimed at the comprehensive implementation of the provisions outlined in the international normative documents on this topic. Among our traditional priorities aimed at ensuring sustainable development are the protection of cultural and natural heritage, the protection of cultural heritage sites in conflict zones, Russian Federation is not a part of the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions of 2005, which join in celebrating this day to promote cultural pluralism of all people, strengthening dialogue, highlighting the contribution of art to sustainable development and the promotion of peace. And one more important date, it also concerns culture. On the 20th of May, we will celebrate Slavic Writing and Culture Day. It reminds us of the common origin of Slavic languages. It's a vivid evidence of the unbreakable historical connection and cultural unity of the Slavic peoples. This year's festivities coincide with the year of the Russian language as a language of inter-ethnic communication declared in the CIS. The Russian language, which remains the main means of international communication in the Commonwealth, helps strengthen humanitarian dialogue, cooperation, mutual understanding among peoples. Central event of the holiday will be held in Moscow on Red Square with the support of the Ministry of Culture of Russia and the government of Moscow. Traditionally, His Holiness Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia will deliver a welcoming approach in the official part of the festive concert. That's a tradition, and the festive concert will be devoted to the year of the teacher and tutor in Russia, the year of the Russian language in the CIS countries, the 150th anniversary of the birth of Sergei Rachmaninoff and Fyodor Chalapin. The concert program is based on works by outstanding Russian composers. The concert will be attended by Valery Gergiev, Denis Matsuev, and I would like to make and announce about the seventh
дипломатов, представителей власти, экспертных и предпринимательских кругов. Основана была эта площадка на принципах такой горизонтальной дипломатии. Целью
the Islamic World Kazan Forum 2023. The OIC Young Diplomats Forum is a unique discussion platform for young diplomats from the OIC countries involving well-known public and political figures, diplomats, government representatives, experts, and businessmen based on the principles of horizontal diplomacy. The purpose of the forum is to promote Russia's foreign policy interests. The main objectives are developing bilateral, multilateral economic ties between participating countries, establishing trusting contacts with young colleagues from the countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation who in the future will determine the foreign policy agenda of their states. I'd like to remind you the forum has been held annually since 2016. Throughout its history, some 160 young diplomats from more than 35 OIC countries have participated in it. The main theme of the meeting will be diplomacy for a new multipolar world. Discussions will focus on trends, challenges of modern diplomacy in the context of a new international security architecture, the work of the International Association of Young Diplomats, and aspects of the field work for young professionals. Around 50 representatives of foreign ministries and experts from 23 countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation are expected to take part in the event. The forum will be accompanied by the ceremony of admission to the International Association of Young Diplomats, a meeting of the Kazan Diplomatic Club, discussion platform involving students of Kazan, Volga-Region Federal University, and a video project on diplomacy. And the forum will be attended by the winners of the International Evgeny Primakov Research and Analysis Competition organized with the support of the Alexander Goch report of the Ministry of Youth Affairs of the Republic of Tatarstan and Tatarstan Investment Development Agency.
And now I am ready to answer your question.
России и Китая в Азии и сказал, что ситуацию с безопасностью.
Hello, Madam Zakharova. Recently, the Japanese foreign minister, could you please...
На Украину. И я его процитирую. Кроме того, Китай и Россия укрепляют свое военное сотрудничество, включая совместные полеты своих бомбардировщиков и совместные военно-морские учения вблизи Японии, сказал Хаяси. Как бы вы могли прокомментировать это заявление?
Вы знаете, давно уже не удивляет риторика или попытки токийского официоза оправдать свое участие в режиссируемой Западом антироссийской кампании, а им же нужно как-то оправдывать, в том числе и перед своим населением, зачем они во всем этом участвуют, учитывая, что они не принадлежат к европейскому континенту, не имеют каких-то границ и тем более каких-то устойчивых исторических интересов и уж точно не защищают свое население, граждан или в этническом плане. Нужно объяснять...
Their populations. Taken into account, they do not belong to the European continent, they do not have some borders or some historic, stable historical interests, and do not protect their population, their citizens, their ethnic communities. Should the militarizations plans by the Hesida administration be expressed? The geography, even the basics of the geography. Now I will tell about that. Maybe not everyone knows that whom Kishida addresses, but Japan is many thousands of kilometers from Ukraine, and they are not connected with the common sea. It's a piece of information for our British friends. Maybe someone is interested in that. So our country has the right to take the necessary steps to protect its sovereignty, both on its own and together with the strategic partners. The constructive interaction with Beijing is carried out by Moscow. It's secret information, but I will tell it for decades. And does it openly, transparently, as diplomats say it. And with mutual respect, not only for each other, but also with regard to partners in the region. For the Japanese government, they should not forget the outcome of the Second World War. The restrictions imposed by Article 9 of the Constitution on their own military activities. It's no secret that it has grown recently. The military activity has been increased, and the Russian side expressed protests. Also on one Tokyo, also jointly with the US near the Russian borders, and we will take the necessary measures to protect the Russian borders in the Far East, and will react in accordance with the national legislation. And I would like to add that if in Tokyo someone is really interested in the issues of security, regional security, and what is happening in general in the region, you should pay attention to totally changed by the West, this landscape of strategic forces, totally changed by the West. Those traditional schemes of relations, the attempts to dismantle the operating integrational ties, and by imposing some interests, not replying to, not in accordance with the interests of the peoples living in that region. They should pay attention to some new measures that turn the region not from the region that has become a guarantee and ensured the balance of powers by its positive, constructive agenda. And now that is all being threatened with another intervention by the United States, Great Britain, and NATO structures into the affairs of the countries. They do not have common borders. I am now talking about Great Britain, NATO countries. They have had no traditional connections, sustainable connections with them, and they have been not involved in ensuring security, but have historically within the last decades brought some destructive factors into the policy of that region. Just look at the Korean Peninsula. We see the efforts, the steps that are taken mainly by Washington, D.C., to grow tensions surrounding the Korean Peninsula. So it's homework for those who are concerned in official Tokyo regarding preserving the balance of power in the region. Just analyze what has been said and understand who is the one to destabilize the situation in the Asia-Pacific region, in Southeastern Asia, and in the region as a whole. We have already spoken about Moldova today. So the government of Moldova has initiated the check of the constitution. The Moldovan citizens have already provided assessment to that decision. The decision of the government of the country to prohibit the Shore Party has caused a wide reaction in the society. So it's not a question, really a question to us, but we should state the fact that has happened because the citizens of Moldova have already replied to such actions as they consider it necessary. So I would like to highlight that it's about one of the opposition parties represented in the Republic Parliament. It's a political force that has a mandate for a part of the country's population. So it's just political landscape in Moldova that has been formed for many years. And by the way, all that has undergone democratic procedures. They did not cause someone's questions. There were difficulties because any young democracy undergoes through different stages of its development. It was a political process. So now has something broken in Chisinau? I think it's not something but someone, but broken with regard to promoting the interest person who is heading the government of Moldova has a Romanian passport and
и запрет вещания в Молдавии 6 русскоязычных телеканалов ничего не напоминает? Мне напоминает. Вот такие же эксперименты проводили на территории Украины американские политические элиты, натовские политические элиты. Все то же самое. Запрет вещания неугодных каналов. Сначала под предлогом того, что они аффилированы с Россией, потом, что они русскоязычные, а потом просто все закрыли. И, кстати говоря, те телевизионные каналы в Румынии, извините, вот уже, вот видите как, уже, по-моему, скоро Санду добьется того, что и Молдавию забудут, как называть, благодаря ее стараниям. Так вот, если сейчас еще ныне действующие молдавские средства массовой информации потирают руки, потому что они получают конкурентные преимущества в связи с тем, что закрыто более большое количество телевизионных каналов, они просто должны посмотреть на пример в близлежащих странах, в частности на Украине, как сначала закрывали под предлогом того, что это каналы русскоязычные, а потом закрыли всех и оставили только один вещательный какой-то источник, который формируется на Банковой. Это не история одной страны, это не история одного какого-то примера, это системный подход. Как только начинается зачистка вот этого самого информационно-политического пространства вне закона, вне логики, вне исторического контекста и вне реалий, жди того, что это будет только идти по нарастающей. Там так и будет, абсолютно в этом уверена. Поэтому стоит ли после этого удивляться падению рейтингов правящей партии за время нахождения у власти?
Start the purchase of the media space be the case. Should we be surprised that the popularity of the governing party decreased from 38% 8% to 24%. And to explain to yourself and to other people such decrease of the popularity, it should be done in an honest way. It's not due to Russian propaganda or the Russian language used in Gagauzia and Transnistria. These are the steps taken contrary to the basic interests of the Moldovan people that speaks the Moldovan language. However, it is renamed and in the Russian language, and they have representatives of different ethnic cultural groups. All that is done now by the government of Sandu is contrary to the core interests of the people of Moldova. Another question: how can you comment the outcome of the working visit of the Asia Cooperation Dialogue Secretary General Ponchaye Tenvivatana to Moscow? So could you repeat that? Mr. Tenvivatana went to Moscow. Could you comment on that? So his working visit took place from 15th to the 16th of May this year. He had a meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov. Key areas of cooperation were considered, and increasing the cooperation in certain spheres and the project activities. Mr. Tanvivatana expressed his gratitude for the initiatives and active role of Russia in strengthening the institutional basis of the dialogue, and the Russian side confirmed its interests in increasing the dialogue, the cooperation with within the framework of the Asia Cooperation Dialogue. It concerns student-teacher mobility, also with the use of digital technologies. I would note the contacts on dialogue and cooperation with Asia, with the leading regional associations aimed at forming the Great Eurasia. The common is the rector of the Institute for International Relations, the Moscow Institute for International Relations, Mr. Torkonov, and also there was an exchange with the member of the European Economic Commission, Mr. Glaziev, on cooperation in Asia. And one more question, please, about the attempts by the CIA to influence through Telegram. I would like to hear your comments. The launch of that miraculous, in brackets, resource, it's a know-how of the CIA, and I have read a lot about them, but I think it's only in the cinema that I have seen that. Many things, considering the current situation and the lack of personnel in Washington, that should be taken from films and activities of the state that is not friendly in that track and whose actions are qualified as adversary, and attempts to carry out such intelligence activities and attempts to interfere into our domestic affairs to destabilize the situation in our country by doing that from the inside, recruiting some marginals different types of marginals, something from old, something from modern technologies, but in general, all those attempts, they are not, unfortunately, they are not new. There are some new things, but the tasks are not concealed, have not been concealed within the recent years. Regarding how that will work, whether that will work, I do not know how to say. It's not propaganda, but just choose the word yourself. Spying activities also not the right word. Maybe some structures that seek to engage some people. But we have watched films, we have read, but it was some those were some reasonable forms. But it looks like just pieces of paper being glued on the walls. So if someone wants to become an American spy, come somewhere and something satirical or something like that. It's the only thing I can say in response to that. Maybe there's some Goebbels work or the McCarthyism methods or some Middle Ages in a bad sense of that word. You know, just burning witches on fires and so on. In this case, frankly speaking, I have a question. It is just not masked. Is it just lack of professionalism? Are they lazy? Maybe they are not sufficiently financed by the CIA. What is happening? Maybe common methods have been recognized inefficient and they just engaged in some mass agitation. Maybe some previous methods have been already used to the full extent and that they have not worked. I do not want to analyze that, but this malicious activity
Russia imposed because of the hostilities in Ukraine. Which countries are we talking about? How likely is it in reality? What would be the response from the Russian side in this case? You know, we're not talking about any support for the anti-Russian course of the US, the EU, and their satellites. All of our Central Asian partners, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, remain faithful to the bonds of friendship and good neighborliness, cooperation and interaction with Russia and our common historic roots. There are no doubts about that. It's all based on the principles of alliance and strategic partnership in new realities. All bilateral agreements between us are being implemented in full, as well as obligations within the framework of Federation Association, such as CIS, the Eurasian Economic Union, and CSTO. By saying that in some Central Asian countries, we are given to understand their readiness to follow Western restrictive measures, we meant primarily the fear of threats of secondary sanctions against the background of brazen and lawful demands from Westerners to report to them. You understand that Washington, Brussels, and London are capable of taking mad measures, and they exercise an undisguised influence on all the countries at the state level and at the level of private sector. And it concerns the citizens as well. We are certain that the Central Asian capitals are well aware that the damage caused by artificially restricting ties with Russia won't be compensated, neither by the West nor anybody else. We have no doubt that the partners are under pressure. You can talk to experts from the countries and read the information in books and other publications. It's not a secret because Washington demands that everyone observe these restrictions, and now they even require reports. So there is no secret behind that, no sensation, and we assume that our partners understand that the potential losses from curtailing ties with Russia would be measurably greater than the effect of the notorious secondary sanctions. And, anything can be made up, but there are time-tested achievements, tangible achievements, which are common and which belong to to us as sovereign states that have built relations based on mutual respect, that have supported each other during difficult periods, and that have refuted the common challenges together. We have two more questions. The second question is the following. Deputy Foreign Minister of Armenia has stated that Armenia is ready to start building its part of the railway to Nakhichevan if it receives clear guarantees that it will remain under Yerevan's jurisdictions. At the same time, the trilateral statement says that the security of the transport communication between the western regions of Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan should be carried out by the border service bodies of the Federal Security Service of Russia. Can you comment on that? Is Moscow holding talks with Yerevan? This issue is being discussed at the level of the deputy prime ministers of our countries. Therefore, it would be useful to contact the press service of the government of the Russian Federation for comments on this issue. This is traditionally the topic which is commented on by them. Thank you very much. And I have one more question. Moldova declares a desire to withdraw from the CIS Interparliamentary Assembly. Which consequences could this have both for Chisinau and the CIS Interparliamentary Assembly? I think I have already commented on the situation in general and concerns such ideas and statements as well. I think that they eradicated everything that is essential and central to the main interests of the peoples of Moldavia. It's important even to imagination that the head of a state can rename the language spoken in the country, and that it can be named after a language spoken in a neighboring country is just unbelievable. Moreover, during the election campaign, other promises were made, the promises to protect the identity of the citizens of Moldavia, to assess the interests of the country. Time has passed after the elections, and now we see the opposite. And such actions are to be compared to the interests of the people of Moldova. What will they gain from that? Will there be any bonuses? No, there will not. Will there be damage? Yes, there will be. It will be inflicted to the business of the country's operators, its financial and economic bodies. Because I would like to remind you that in the CIS, there are hundreds of agreements that are beneficial for Chisinau from the objective point of view. They exist not only on paper, but they are beneficial for Chisinau and for the people of Moldavia. They have been developed, and it has taken a long time. And they reflect multilateral trade, economic, social, humanitarian relations that bind all countries of the Commonwealth, including Moldova. So abandoning them would be detrimental, first of all, to Moldova itself. As I've said, why does Sandu need it? The answer is obvious. She's not acting in the interests of her people, but in the interest of those who are behind her, who has given her the Romanian citizenship, and who has ordered her to sever ties with its regional historical neighbors. Do we have Reuters with us? Yeah, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Can you see me well? Yes, I can see her. and hear you clearly. Okay. My first question regards the Green Deal. 8 minutes ago, I received a message with reference to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said that the Green Deal had been prolonged, and I would like to ask you to comment on the statement in general. Maybe not now, but later during the briefing. I would like you to tell you for how long it has been prolonged. Yes, if you allow me, I will answer the question later. I would like to get the most recent information, and I will comment on that at a later stage. And another question concerns African citizens. During the year, we have been receiving information about African citizens who fought in the Wagner organization. We are talking about Mr. Nyirenda, citizen of Zambia, and Mr. Turismo, Tanzanian. It is known to us that the Zambian Foreign Ministry has addressed Russia in a rather harsh form, as it might seem. With the demand to provide all the details. So is Russia not concerned that if cases of death of African nationals fighting on Russia's side continue, Russia's relations with African countries could deteriorate? You know, we wonder why you don't pay attention to the fact that people are killed using the weapons provided by Great Britain. You represent the Reuters agency. You are affiliated with the United Kingdom and the Anglo-Saxon world in general. Don't pretend that it's not the true. People that you have mentioned are being killed using the weapons delivered by Western countries. When you cover this topic, do you ask such questions to Westerners? Do you ask such questions in Berlin, Paris, Rome, in NATO, in the EU? Do you ask their question regarding the weapons delivered by the representatives of the Western regimes to the regime of Zelensky that are used to kill other people? Why don't you care about African people? What about the depleted uranium? Does it include any elements of artificial intelligence? Will these weapons be efficient only against some national groups? Are there such developments by the British scientists? Of course they are not. Now they are being used according to the British side itself, which has reported on their deliveries to the regions, not only against the generations who will live there, and also against the people who will consume the produce from the region. Do you care about the population of the African continent? Though I don't know how the population of the Asian continent is worse or better, I don't draw such a line between peoples. Do you cover this when you talk about the delivery of the weapons based on depleted uranium? Do they care about their health when you know that they will consume the grain produced in the region, which is supposed to be provided to the countries in need, as the Western world says? This is the first thing. The second thing is that the Reuters agency doesn't care about the destiny of the British mercenaries, which are in the hot area. Do you have any specific statistics? Do you have figures? I do. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of people who directly represent Great Britain, mercenaries, instructors, people in charge of combat activities. Do you distinguish the British citizens from the citizens of African countries? Do you think that they are worse or better if you don't care about their destiny? It's a very strange question, and it shows that people who make you ask such questions are still guided by the opinion based on segregation, neo-colonialism. You can't distinguish people on the basis of their origin, ethnicity, nationality. I have a similar opinion regarding the possibility to divide the civilians when they say that women, children, and old people go to one camp and the others go to the other. Obviously, people who fight represent a different category. But when we're talking about the civilians, I don't think that we should distinguish between them because there is no moral or legal ground behind that. So if you really care about the people who are dying, you need to ask more questions to the countries who supply the weapons. I don't insist, but it's a recommendation. And the weapons that is being used right now to kill people, and I'm talking about the weapons that will be used to kill people because there will be more diseases related to cancer, and please don't distinguish people based on the fact what continents they belong to. Thank you very much. And if there will be information regarding the Green Deal, I will be very grateful. Now, Moscow Baku News Agency. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have already mentioned today that on May the 19th, the foreign minister of Azerbaijan and Armenia will meet in Moscow. But bearing in mind the forthcoming negotiations, what do you think the main obstacles in the negotiation process between Baku and Yerevan? Because now, following the results of the negotiations in Charles Michel, we haven't heard any promises to settle the situations. Do you think that there is an attempt by the EU to determine its role in the negotiation process in the information area? That's what I've mentioned several times. They don't mention any documents that are in the basis of the negotiation process. They are irritated by the fact that these peaceful initiatives were developed with the participation of Russia, and the fact that they are given tangible results. They believe that no one has the right to get a deserved positive appraisal of one's efforts. That is why it all turns the mediation process into something destructive. Because no constructive or tangible results that would testify to any movement in the positive directions are witnessed at the moment. And that is why I don't want to mention anything that has been developed with the assistance of Moscow. It doesn't mean that, and I would like to highlight that we don't appreciate the steps which will lead to any constructive results. At all times when there is a possibility to make the right move, which will lead to the settlement or at least a temporary normalization of the situation, we always highlight the positive dynamics and a tendency on all tracks. You see that if there are tangible results in this area, we will highly appreciate them. So far, there is nothing to be appreciated. So far, we see just some horrible desire to change the agenda, to rewrite it, to claim the merit for some results that have been achieved. Also some jealousy. What is the main problem? Why is the process stalled? The Azerbaijani side has said again that there is no real progress. Once again, according to you, what is the main problem in the implementation of the agreement? Why isn't there any tangible result? Azerbaijan has said once again that nothing important has been achieved. There are a lot of reasons. We cannot single out one of them. There have been a lot of difficult situations requiring a solution from the parties, from the mediators. I won't be able to single out one reason. My second question is the following. Russia and Turkey have had positive relations in recent years. And in your view, how might the outcome of the presidential election in the Republic of Turkey affect international processes, and in particular the situation in South Caucasus, given the fact that you know what our traditional position is? We don't comment on elections in other countries until they are held and until the results are announced. And of course, we are not talking about any preferences, because this is a sovereign choice of the people of a state. It is applied to all the countries. Of course, there are situations where there are observers from Russia. They are capable of delivering comments and following the results of elections. We make official statements, but we never do that before the electoral process. You're well aware of our traditional approach, of course, but it's possible to comment on them. Does the current policy of Ankara is based on a common understanding with Russia? Are there some common points? That's an interesting question, because as far as you understand, the situation is ambiguous. There are questions where we find common grounds and where we work jointly, and there are other issues where we have different opinions. That's normal work process. We don't normally speak in general terms, but I've got to comment specifically on a particular part of our interaction. For example, I can mention the situation of our cooperation in South Caucasus, since you've mentioned it, and the issues of Syria and questions which are difficult to settle, involving many parties. Recently, there has been multilateral meetings, and there are examples showing that over the recent years, we have found common grounds, despite the fact that it was unimaginable. But there is a goodwill on the part of Moscow and Ankara on many difficult issues that many people believe are impossible to solve, but still there is a constructive dialogue which leads to tangible results. Very good, a lot of examples.
And as you understand very well, in modern history is quite complex, and many thought that constant disagreements, dramatic development of the situation, but thanks to the efforts of the leadership of the countries, the diplomatic efforts of the countries, the solutions were found to the situation that someone thought would not be resolved. So there are some positive things we can mention. Today, the Russian foreign minister said the US and its allies are trying to exert pressure on Armenia for the Americans to ensure security in Armenia. Can it be considered as one more example of pressure? Because sometimes as a boomerang, it returns. It just returns to them, and they do not abandon that logic. Thank you. Is Anna Dalu with us? Yes. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have two questions today. The first one, according to the media reports, the Federal Security Service arrested officials did not contact us on that issue. Thank you very much. The second question. As the date of the Black Sea Grain Initiative is approaching, but you have already promised. Yes, I have promised, and I will do what I have promised. So we will move on. China Media Corporation. Yes, we also had a question regarding the grain deal. As it was just been reported regarding the prolongation, and we would like some precisions. Why hasn't been done in the 11th hour? So I will comment on that a little bit later. Do you have the second question? Yes, on the 19th of May in Japan and Hiroshima, the G7 took place, and some experts note that some issues discussed at this summit could be destabilizing factors for the Asia-Pacific region. And how could you comment on such destabilization? As you have said, from 19th to 21st of May, the G7 summit will take place in Hiroshima. It is just of absurd nature that the collective West has stated its topics. One of them is nuclear threat by Russia. It's in Hiroshima. The cynicism of the Americans is just striking, and the absurdity by the Japanese hosts. So it's just contrary to the common sense. So the only country that directly experience in that city and the living people experience nuclear weapons. And there is some information in the archives that the Americans did not intend to stop in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but intended to bomb other Japanese cities in August, September, and October 1945. That frightening fate of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to become the burnt desert. They were just saved by the capitulation of Japan on the 15th of August 1945. The country just got the role of the so-called US unsinkable aircraft carrier with all the consequences. So they just made a conclusion for themselves. Nothing has happened. It has gone according to the plan, but never in life for their unmotivated ambitions to restrain the Soviet Union and the revenge, those atomic bombardments of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Washington, has never made any excuses. They just expressed some comprehension, something unclear, so this was just war. But strategically, those bombardments did not influence the end of the Second World War, no influence at all. We do not doubt that by coming to Japan, the US president, as his predecessors, are very unlikely to make some excuses, but we would strongly advise that he should not speak as a master, but not dwell on some so-called Russian nuclear threat. They are obliged to make excuses to all the victims who suffered from the nuclear strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that is just another evidence of their policy. And the NATO allies, the nuclear states, Great Britain, Germany and France, that have nuclear weapons on their territory. In that anti-Russian speech, they will support in their wordless lack of excuses of that they're guilty before many people. And now London is it has been formed for the discussion of financial and economic issues and agreeing on the stance on the major global challenges. And Russia also participated, although it used to be G8, but we were never allowed to participate in financial global issues. It was just their exceptional prerogative of them and their friends. Now it has completely
штабом, мозговым трестом, где под предводительством англосаксов выдумываются самые одиозные антироссийские и антикитайские решения. Они потом навязываются проамериканской массовке из числа стран НАТО, Евросоюза, других сателлитов Вашингтона. В общем, это еще один такой опорный пункт для выработки реализации проамериканской политики, а проамериканской не про американский народ, а про соответствующую часть элиты. Это не, конечно, отражает интересы полицентричного мира, вообще даже не учитывает их. Они, мне кажется, все равно как-то вот пытаются навязать историю про то, что они доминируют, пытаются показать свое превосходство.
Dominance in comparison to the Asia-Pacific countries, the countries of Africa, Latin America. Why do they need that? To preserve the Western global dominance, to fight political opponents, to help themselves.
представляют, кроме, так сказать, интересов США и НАТО-центричного вот этого круга, совершенно непонятно. То есть без учета таких глобальных игроков, как, не знаю, Россия, Китай, страны БРИКС в целом, говорить о том, что они задают какую-то тональность в экономике, например, в частности, просто невозможно. Они просто пытаются использовать этот инструмент для насаждения натовской конъюнктуры на различные регионы мира, включая, как видно, по географической принадлежности гостей саммита и азиатской. Существующие мирохозяйственные связи, они же не могут этим заниматься, им никто не разрешит. Работа ориентируется на поддержание солидарности в борьбе с некими автократиями. Это вот тоже интересный, конечно, термин. Сохранение гегемонистского миропорядка, основанного на западных правилах. Очередное будет, наверное, антироссийское заявление, ну, как без него. Поэтому про конструктивную роль группы 7 в деле глобального развития, стабилизации говорить просто не приходится. Все с точностью наоборот. Разрушение, раздрай, хаос и так далее. Ну и, конечно, они ввергают международные отношения путем вот этой антироссийской, антикитайской риторики и действий, которые пытаются предпринять в хаос и опасную, абсолютную непредсказуемость. Поэтому я думаю,
forum, does it is it in accordance with the interest of the global development and so on? Now, Moscow Post, we have 4 questions today. The Georgian authorities have allowed air flights to Russia and back because it's for mutual benefit, and on the Foreign Ministry of Russia website, it is noted that the restoration of diplomatic relations with Tbilisi have been broken. Yes, they have been broken in 2008 on the initiative of Mikhail Saakashvili. Unfortunately, it's contrary to the realities in the region, and we are well aware of that position, but we have never initiated some negative things in the relations with Georgia. We have supported their normalization, and we are trying to facilitate the bilateral contacts and also the contacts between the citizens of Russia and Georgia. We have seen a request for that from many people. We have just spoken about it for so many times when asked by the civil society, and it has already become a ritual to answer the questions about air transportation, when will it happen, and so on. We think that the humanitarian ties should to abandon the restrictions on air shipments. It's just within that logic. As you know, Russian citizens and the citizens of around 100 other countries enter Georgia without visas, and we have the largest Georgian community abroad in Russia. We have had many requests from the representatives of business, scientific, educational circles of Georgia, and Russian Georgia Business Council, and the Federal National Georgian Cultural Autonomy in Russia. The decision adopted by the President of the Russian Federation is to facilitate the development of trade and economic relations and further development of tourism, where Russia is absolutely the first one, and to provide an additional impetus to the long-standing traditions of the Russian and Georgian humanitarian times in culture, sports, education, youth organizations, and from our point of view, so many questions on that topic. I do not those interests we have voiced by civil society representatives and next question. Where do you see the benefit of preserving relations on the level of ambassadors with the European Union? We can see on the website of the EU delegation in Moscow some statements about regular dialogues being suspended due to Moscow not being in accordance with the agreements. And also we see some statements about the use of chemical weapons by Moscow. By Russia, how could you comment on that? But what should I comment? I think it's those who publish such statements, they should comment on that. Our estimation of malicious activities of the Western countries, of those democracies, you hear that regularly. But why are they carrying out such information work? Why publishing such materials? You should ask them. Being boasting of being so open, they should prove that. Thank you very much. Another question.
One more question. Concern has been expressed regarding the use of weapons and shells based on depleted uranium around the world, including Ukraine, and the UK says it has supplied such shells to Kyiv but doesn't monitor their use. What's the latest information on this area? And we are engaged in political work in this area. We don't use any threats, so we don't exercise any pressure, but we are really engaged in political work. We have provided Great Britain with specific information and figures, bearing in mind that recently such depleted uranium ammunition has been used on the continent, and we believe that such delivery will increase the suffering among the civilian population. There will be a very obvious result, the contamination of the terrain with hazardous substances. I'm talking about not only about the local contamination, but about the food that will be produced on the territory. No one in Britain thinks about that because they don't care, since it goes in line with the Western policy. It has been so for many centuries. There has been a thesis that après moi le déluge, and this is the same logic. There are a number of international reports regarding such consequences, but no one in Downing Street is going to read so forth. So all of this Russophobic rate. In general, the question of Ukraine's use of depleted uranium munitions should be posed directly, not to us, but to the authorities in Kyiv. Because if these people, if we can call them so, after what they have claimed, including pleading guilty of terrorist attacks, are to understand that they proclaim their love for the terrain and the territory that they're trying to liberate. They are to understand that they're doing the opposite. They destroy it because they contaminate it. That's how they make impossible to use it in the future, and they render it impossible to be used. And these questions are to be addressed to Washington, Brussels, and London. And the last question: Russia has completed its chairmanship in the Arctic Council. How do you see the prospects of this organization, and what has Russia gained from its partnership from Western countries as part of this council? I would like to comment on what your colleagues have asked me about the Green Deal. As it is called, in reality, we're talking about the Black Sea Initiative. First of all, we confirm the fact that as President of Turkey, opportunity to help ensure the global food security and to help the countries which are in greatest need. The second thing regards our principal assessment of the agreements in achieved in Istanbul. Our position hasn't changed, and all the faults in their implementations are to be remedied. Now about the prospects for the future of the Arctic Council. Yes, it is true that now the prospects of the structure look very uncertain due to the continuing contradictions among its member countries regarding the continuation of its work and its role in international Arctic cooperation. As a result of this suspension of the Council's activities initiated by the Western countries, the implementation of the objectives set out in the declaration and the 2030 strategic plan adopted at the Reykjavik ministerial meeting in 2021 remains virtually frozen. There is no choice, selection, and the implementation of new projects. That's why the project element has started to decrease, and the blame is to fall within the Western countries who are guided by their conjuncture. That's why we can predict the weakening and maybe the marginalization of the. We express our vision in public space as well. Russia's interaction with the Western member countries of the Council is above all important for solving region-wide problems, many of which require collective action such as adaptation to climate change in the region. Such cooperation has enabled the countries of the region to efficiently manage soft security risks and challenges, including such areas as search and rescue at sea, oil spill response, combating marine debris, emissions reductions, and wildfires in the Arctic, since the Arctic Council has proven to be an important format for developing collective approaches in this area over more than a quarter century of its existence. This is an organization that has been engaged in practical cooperation for the benefit of the peoples of the region's countries based on their everyday needs. You know, it used to be an organization which solved a lot of problems based on experts' opinions and the citizens of the regions that are a part of the organization. What Westerners have done of it is that haven't shifted the focus from creative policy that could have been used to develop new innovative rules to not only the Arctic Council. We have witnessed similar tendencies in the Asia-Pacific region. Everything that used to be pragmatic work for the benefit of the peoples of the region has been replaced with the political nonsense and the promotion of selfish, narrow-minded interests has turned into chaos everything that was developed before. Thank you. Do we have Uru? Artem Alexandrov from Uru. I have two questions. Two main questions and one additional one. The first regards the statements by the ambassador of the U.S. to South Africa. He said that Russia provided weapons to the country. Then he even had to apologize for such claims. Can we say that the U.S. is pressuring South Africa because of its friendly stance toward Moscow and trying to force them to change their foreign policy? I've given a similar answer to a similar question, though it regarded another region and other countries. Unfortunately, the U.S. Doesn't have any other means because their diplomacy has been an element of highlighting vital central interests of a country, but pressure as a single tool and pressure as an element as an element which completely replaces diplomacy is unacceptable. And when you are asking about pressure, we can say whom they have for common relations. This has made them alienate themselves from those allies. And the only thing they wanted to do is to impose their rules on them. That's why such incidents happen to American diplomats, even high-ranking ones all over the world, because it's a habit. Some countries have the willingness and the possibility to oppose them, and there have been a lot of cases of the kind. It's a unique example. Even the closest allies of the U.S. don't have such an opportunity. That's why U.S. ambassadors behave in a very rude way, demanding from them to put down everything that they say. And as for the countries in transition and the developing countries, which are not recognized as full-fledged states by Washington, behave independently and they defend their national interests. And the leadership of South Africa has proven on multiple occasions that no one can treat them in a rude and polite way, because it's just unacceptable in general. As regards all these arguments, we will leave it to the administration of South Africa, because the U.S. ambassador has accreditation in this country. And we have already seen official statements by South Republic who said that there were no proof behind the statement. And also the administration of the president of South Africa said that such statements undermine the basis of the partnership between the two countries. If you have some specific questions, you can address them to the embassy of South Africa, we continue to monitor the situation. Our embassy has published on this a relevant comment on this issue. My next question regards the arrival of Belarusian foreign minister to Moscow. In particular, it has been mentioned that one of the purposes of the visit is to review the implementation of the program for coordinated action in the field of foreign policy of the Union State for 2022-2023. I wonder if a coordination is expected for a later date within the framework of the Union State. And would like to know if there is work underway to ensure that the future Belarus and Russia will have a common foreign policy. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to the talks from today and the press conference. The video is already available. The text version will be available soon. The second thing is that the program that you have mentioned have been adopted by now our countries from 1996, and they are needed in order to adjust the diplomatic work amid the changing conditions in the world. That's how we explain this adjustments. The current program covers the period for 2022-2023. On this basis, Minsk and Moscow provide each other support to ensure the respect for and the promotion of mutual interests. They coordinate the approaches on the platforms of international organizations and regarding the third countries. And Belarus is one of our closest allies, and our approaches on most of the international issues are similar or coincide. An important element of the program is the purpose to consolidate the diplomatic work, to implement the documents approved by the Union State. It includes 28 programs. It also includes the commitment